Welcome back, 1570 AM WNST, where we have the pleasure of being joined by our very own Luke Jones. Saw him on TV the other night, and the announcer said, "See that guy next to Luke Jones? That's John Harbaugh, and that's Tyree Phillips and Marlon Humphrey." So you were recognized nationally there, Luke. They didn't know who the people next to you were, but the announcer knew exactly who you were.
Well, don't forget about Ben Cleveland either.
Oh,
I
you know
mean, he
what?
was the guy.
I thought that was him. I snapped a picture of the TV. I thought that was Big Country back there.
Yeah, and you can't forget about him because he's the guy when he was drafted. Now Braun Strowman has since been released
Yep.
by WWE
Yep.
and is now more on the indies and everything, but he drew comparisons to Braun Strowman. But no, the only thing, Dennis, I think you're a little mistaken. I was up in the second level, had great seats, loved the arena at UMBC. I mean, it was a great time. But yeah, John Harbaugh and company had slightly better seats than one Luke Jones had. But yeah, fun night out at UMBC for AEW Dynamite. First time AEW's been to Baltimore since the pandemic. I think back to I guess it was their Full Gear pay-per-view in November of 2019, and with the pandemic and how that impacted live events of all kinds, but certainly pro wrestling. But it was fun to get out and see a live pro wrestling show. I mean, you and I have talked plenty of wrestling, and I'm sure people want to hear us talk about the draft this week. But it's certainly fun to get back to a pro wrestling event after a few years.
Luke, I'll make a deal. Next time you and your brother want to go down there, let me know. I'll get us front row tickets, courtesy of me. We'll take we'll have fun. We'll have better seats this time around.
You're on, but we'll
Absolutely.
have to. If we're going to be on TV, though, we need to look the part. So we need to figure out what
Okay.
wrestlers we're going to dress up like.
Okay. You have to. I haven't kept up lately. Admittedly, I've been too busy. But you have to get me up to speed. And it looked like on TV it was a very good crowd there too. Was it a packed house, Luke, or it's
It was packed. I mean, I
wow?
from what I understand, I think it was sold out. In fact, I had a couple people tweet me because I mentioned I wasn't at the Orioles game on Wednesday night because I took off to see the wrestling show, but had a couple people even tweet me saying they were trying to get seats. I think there were very few, like, in
Wow.
terms of actual people in the arena, very few empty seats. I mean, it was packed. And I mean, AEW's done very well for themselves. I mean, you go up trying to take on a behemoth like WWE, which has been, you know, the equivalent of Kleenex when you're talking about pro wrestling, and they're just the brand. I mean, for so many people, it's not pro wrestling. You think of it as WWE because of where Vince McMahon has been and where he's taken the company, especially over the last 20 years. But AEW's done nicely for themselves, and they've got former WWE talent. They have
They do.
some, Sting is still in AEW. He doesn't wrestle a whole lot, but for a guy in his 60s, moves around incredibly well. But I think most importantly, they've got a lot of really good young talent as well. And it's a lot of fun. And it was neat to see the reaction of John Harbaugh and some of the Ravens players that were there who presumably don't watch the product on the regular, but you could tell there were some moments over the course of the night where they were really excited at what they were seeing.
Yeah, no question about it. I happened to tune in. I saw Sting, I saw Daniel Bryan, and I saw the other guy, the crazy guy. I forget his name though.
Are you
Uh,
thinking of John Moxley, who
yeah,
was Dean
Moxley.
Ambrose in
Correct,
WWE?
correct.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
exactly who I'm thinking of. But it looked like it was a pretty good time by everybody. Everybody looked like a packed house. Looked like the Ravens were having a great time, and it looked like a very good show.
It really was. And at one point during one of the commercial breaks, they actually recognized, they announced to the crowd that John Harbaugh and some Ravens players were there. And they even got a little bit of a Seven Nation Army chant going. So it was fun. I mean, anytime, whether we're talking about pro wrestling, whether we're talking about a sporting event, concerts, all kinds of different events that many of it, that we've missed out on for the better part of 2 years, and we're getting
Yeah.
back to that, thankfully, at this point. But it's fun to congregate and to have that kind of enjoyable night. And again, guys like you and me who've talked about wrestling plenty of times in the past, fun to see that. So definitely recommend, next time they come in. And Tony Khan, who's the owner of AEW, came out, and he's their lead guy. He's their Vince McMahon, so to speak. Assured the crowd that they would be back in Baltimore sooner
Awesome.
rather than later.
Well, let me know when, because again, I took my dad to a WWE match many years ago, right before he passed. Sat ringside, and that was just a memory that I'll always keep forever. And I think sitting up close, it gives you a different feel for what they're doing.
It really does. In fact, I was talking to a friend about this the other day, and I mean, people who don't watch wrestling, and I'm not saying if you watch it, you'll love it and you'll become a lifelong fan. But if you do watch it, and especially what you just mentioned, if you have a chance to see it in person, and if you can really get an up close and personal look, you'll have a newfound respect for just how incredibly athletic these guys are. I mean, there was one match on Wednesday night in during Dynamite, their Wednesday night show, that Ray Phoenix and Dante Martin, two guys that went at it, and these guys defy gravity. I mean, you think of Rey Mysterio in his prime, and Rey Mysterio's, he's the greatest of all time when you talk about luchador style wrestling, and high flying and flips and all those different things. But boy, these two guys, Rey Mysterio, who's still active, still doing his thing in WWE, albeit at a much later stage of his career. If he had a chance to catch a glimpse of that, he'd be proud, because those two guys, they stole the entire show. They're not the two biggest names in AEW, but they stole the show. So I always tell people, I say this to my family, I say this to friends, that before you completely dismiss pro wrestling, go to a show sometime, and you'll at the very least have an appreciation for it. And I would guarantee, and I equate this to hockey. I'm not an ice hockey guy, and Nestor and I've talked about this plenty over the years, but it's really fun to watch in person. So I kind of feel like pro wrestling is in the same vein, that you may not become a lifelong fan or start watching the shows, but you check it out once and you're kind of blown away just how much is really involved in it. Even though, yes, we know the matches are choreographed and the outcomes are predetermined.
My dad, God rest his soul, he swore it was real. He used to, I mean, when I remember when Chief Jay Strongbow and Haystacks Calhoun got their heads busted open, he was crying. He was worried about their families. I'm like, Dad, it's fake. He's like, no, it's not. And when I took him to the match, he watched ringside. He watched Hogan and Vader. I mean, the image burned in my mind of him leaning over and high-fiving Hogan and high-fiving Vader. I mean, I'm going to lose it here in a minute, but the other takeaway was, when you sit that close, you see how they miss sometimes. You see how it's really put on. So after the match, I said, Dad, you have to admit it is fake. He said, you know what, you're right, but I still love it. So you know what, all was well with Dad, and God rest his soul. But that's an incredible memory, and I owe it to professional wrestling.
That's awesome that you mentioned that. I mean, my father, who's will be 18 years this fall, but there are two things I've loved since I was 3 years old: pro wrestling and baseball. I mean, those are the two things. And think about that. It's so rare to love something your entire life like that. Not talking other than your family, talking about leisure activity, things of that nature, where, from the time you're an young child, until being an adult now, approaching 40 years of age. So it's amazing to think that. But as you mentioned that, I think of stories of my great grandmother on my dad's side, and my great grandmother, who was long gone before I was born, on my mom's side. One of her grandmothers, stories about cussing at the wrestlers, watching it on TV. And I want to say this was my mom's, my grandfather, my mom's dad. I want to say his mom. I could be wrong about that. Whoever it was spilled the beans that it was fake and just ruined it for her, because it's funny to hear about that. So it's fascinating how it's evolved from, you think of where it was 60s, 70s, 80s, kayfabe, so to speak, still being protected, and it's still protected to a degree, but obviously the curtain's been pulled back. I mean, I listen to Busted Open, that's on Sirius XM radio. They have a daily morning show that they talk about wrestling, and they talk about it from a creative standpoint. And you and I've done that in the past, but they also talk about the business in general and how it works. And I mean, I enjoy it, and I understand it's not a quote legitimate sport, but the athleticism, the physical demands, the effort that goes into it is very legitimate, and the injuries are very legitimate. And you go out there and you see these guys and gals, fantastic women's wrestling, and where that's come over the last 15, 20 years, and just the women getting an opportunity even compared to how it was back in the day. It's awesome, and it's a lot of fun. And again, it's one of my passions. As much as I cover sports for a living, cover the Ravens, cover the Orioles, but pro wrestling has definitely been one of those passions of mine that I've enjoyed throughout my life.
Well, we came to the States back in '73 from Greece. And when you come overseas, especially back then, um, you're coming from Europe, you love soccer. And in '73, there wasn't much soccer on television. You had 3 or 4 channels. And Saturdays at 4 p.m., we sat around our little 9-inch black and white TV set, the entire family with the rabbit ears and the aluminum foil. And at 4 p.m., WWF back then, we watched an hour of wrestling. It was just a phenomenal time for the family to gather around and cheer for the baby faces and boo the heels. And it was something we really look forward to, because
It's
when you come overseas, football's complicated back then. Baseball was, hockey was unheard of. Basketball, you never watched. So especially back in those days, I'm sure it's different now. But I think that's why a lot of immigrants from Europe in particular gravitated towards the sport of wrestling, because it was simple to watch.
it's interesting you mentioned that, because as we were parking at UMBC on Wednesday afternoon and walking to the arena, late early evening at that point, I said to my brother, because I saw the doors opened at 6 p.m. The show started at 7. But the line, it was a long line for people waiting. It was right around 6 o'clock, so they were starting to let people in. And I just looked at the line and I said to my brother, I've been to a lot of sporting events in my life as a fan, as a media member, and to see the crowd. And I'm glad you brought up about your family's perspective with this, but it's a very diverse crowd. It
Oh, it
really
is.
was. You saw different ages. You saw people of different color. People of different backgrounds. People dressed. I mean, a very wide range of individuals who went out there. You saw people that were older, much older. People have been wrestling fans for decades upon decades, and you saw little kids out there with their parents and their friends and things of that nature. So, really cool to see. And it's it is a diverse uh, crowd, and pro wrestling, when done well and when represented well, can cast a pretty wide net. So that's pretty cool that you mentioned that. And it was something that resonated with me as we were getting in line to walk into the arena on Wednesday night.
No, you'll see people in line that are unemployed, on minimum wage, and millionaires. I mean, it attracts.
Absolutely.
I mean, you had millionaires there with some of the Ravens, whether it's Humphrey or Harbaugh, and whatnot. So it does touch on a lot of different areas of life. And when people tell me, it's fake, and aren't most movies fictional? So we're paying for entertainment here. We know we're getting put on, but if it's a good product and you get caught up on a storyline, get lost for a few hours. And it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And typically, and sometimes it's stretched out longer, typically for the protagonist, there ends up being a happy ending. It might not be that week, it might not be that month, but typically it does wind out. And the one thing that you can say about that compared to real sports is
Right.
you're not guaranteed that, right? I mean, sometimes you lose. Your team loses. Your team loses a lot. So it's kind of fun in that way. But yeah, I mean, it's fun, and doesn't take anything away from talking about the draft and the very productive weekend the Ravens had. And still questions with this roster. I don't think there's any way to look over that, but I think you look at what they did over the weekend. Nothing predetermined or fake about that. Came away with a lot of talented football players, and some surprises along the way. That's for sure. Certainly with the Marquise Brown trade, at least to everyone outside the building.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun in and of itself. And I don't mean that disrespectful to Marquise Brown by any means. It was just a lot of fun to trade back into the first round. We thought we were done after the 14th pick. So as a fan, it was very exciting that back on the clock again. And now what's going to happen? Are they going to keep the pick? Are they going to trade up again? Are they going to trade back? What are they going to do? So it just added that much more fun and intrigue to that first round.
Yeah, almost made it a little more pro wrestling, right?
Oh, it
Like,
was
right? I
great.
mean,
It
just a
was
little more
great.
drama involved. But yeah, I mean, it was, it's one of those things that I look at it right now, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't have some very legitimate concerns about the wide receiver position as it stands right now. I do wonder, were there opportunities at some point along the way, knowing that Marquise Brown very early in the offseason requested this? So, and we'll talk about that. We'll continue to talk about that. I'm guessing they'll add a veteran at some point. Do I think it's going to be someone that moves the needle? I'm very skeptical of that. I don't think any, I know people have mentioned Jarvis Landry, for example.
Right.
Is Baltimore the place he's going to sign if he has to, sign a 1-year pillow contract, prove it kind of deal? Probably not. But could they trade for someone? That's always possible. But to get back to the point you were making, if it weren't for the fact that the Lamar Jackson draft weren't so recent in as far as just what Ravens draft history, we'd be talking about this being an absolutely crazy night. And it was still crazy, but not quite at that level where you trade back into 32 and you take your franchise quarterback of the future. So, but very much, made for a very crazy night. As I was arriving at Owings Mills on day one of the draft, I was thinking, okay, they're picking 14th earlier than normal. Thinking this is going to be pretty run of the mill. Maybe I'll get out of there at a decent time and head home. And nope, they draft Kyle Hamilton, who was a surprise that he was still there at 14. Although we talked about the possibility of that,
we really did.
But certainly, even if there was some thought, certainly there were questions about Marquise Brown from a long-term standpoint. But I don't think anyone was truly expecting anything like that to happen when it did. So you make that trade and then you draft Tyler Linderbaum, who, let's face it, I mean, as talented as the player is and as highly regarded as he is, he's a little undersized compared to how the Ravens have viewed their center position. Did much more zone blocking at Iowa compared to the Ravens being much more of a gap, blocking team over the last couple of years. And we've talked about it, the fact that they just haven't valued the center position. So that was surprising. It had to be surprising. And that's not to say that it's going to be a bad pick or anything like that, but expectations will be very high. When you draft a center in the first round, you're not looking for him to be, he'll be Bradley Bozeman's replacement and everything's fine. Or you're not looking for him to be, he's better than Bradley Bozeman. When you draft a center in the first round, this guy better be a Pro Bowl player, because otherwise the positional value doesn't stack up in the same way that, we could talk about Jordan Stout being drafted in the 4th round to replace Sam Cook. He better be a darn good punter, because otherwise you used a 4th round pick on a punter, right? I mean, there's always positional value involved there. So yeah, I mean, everything that played out in that first round, and then, you come away with 2 positions that weren't necessarily regarded as their biggest needs, but you love Hamilton's versatility, the upside there, the size. I mean, I think that the easiest, even though it's a lazy description, but the easiest way to kind of view him is you're hoping he can be a slightly bigger version of Derwin James and what he's been able to do for the Chargers when he's been healthy. And in the case of Linderbaum, he needs to be the anchor of that interior offensive line. You're hoping for the next decade. That's really what you're looking for if you're going to take a center with the 25th overall pick. So we'll see how it plays out. But you get the sense, and having talked to Joe Ortiz on Wednesday, he did a little film session with the media. You get how excited they really are. And look, every team's excited about their picks. Let's not make it to be more than it is, but you really get the sense that they were really happy to be able to take some of the players they did when they were able to select them in the draft from a value standpoint.
And you have to think that these players are thrilled to be coming to the Baltimore Ravens. I don't think a wide receiver would have been thrilled to come to the team. In all fairness, as constructed, I don't blame Marquise Brown for wanting out of here. I think it was time for him to go, but getting back to the Ravens picks, Hamilton gets a chance to play on a vaunted Ravens defense. Then Linderbaum, he gets to snap the ball to Lamar Jackson, Iowa kid. Good connection between Iowa and the Ravens with Ferenz and Harbaugh. Ojabo gets to play for Mike McDonald again, which I think he's got to be thrilled about that. Falele, the big tackle, and Big Mauler in a run-first offense. The tight ends. I mean, I think these are all the running back. I mean, these are all players that should be very happy to come to the Ravens with an opportunity to play. Whereas a wide receiver, unless this offense, Luke, gets more balanced, which I'm a big proponent of, I don't see this as it can't be a great attractive spot for our wide receiver. They're only going to throw the ball so many times. So
yeah, and that's going to continue to be, you just said it, wanting to see more balance. And for me, it's not even 50-50 or anything like that. It comes back to the efficiency. When they need to throw, are they going to have effective wide receivers that are going to make plays? And I feel good about Rashad Bateman. I've liked what I've seen from James Prochet, albeit limited sample. Devin Duvernay, go back and look. He played a lot last year, and the numbers just weren't there. So I'm not saying he's bad, but when you're talking about right now, if the season starts today, he's probably your other starting wide receiver. I don't know, Dennis. I mean, that's what worries me. But getting back to what you mentioned about, the other positions, guys that fit, be remiss if we didn't mention Travis Jones, who might actually kind of be low key. I mean, it's easy to talk about the first round picks, right? But when you look at what he did, and albeit I know it's UConn, it's not Alabama and not the SEC, but he played a ton of snaps. Big guy, moves really well. I mean, his hands, just thunderous hands, which is obviously a big part of defensive line play. But for me, I see him, especially after on the heels of all the talk about Jordan Davis in the first round and whether he'd be a pass rush presence and all that. And I'm not saying that Travis Jones is going to be that same player against the run per se, but you look at what he was able to do, and maybe clearly he'll play fewer snaps in Baltimore than he did for UConn, because that's just how the Ravens handle their defensive linemen. But I think he's got a chance to give them some juice as an inside pass rusher. And when I say that, it doesn't mean I think he's going to be a guy who gets 12 sacks a year. There are very few defensive tackles that, Aaron Donald's a unicorn, right? There just aren't many guys that do that, to that degree. But do I think he could be a guy that could give them pass rush presence in a way that's a little closer to Haloti Ngata than a Brandon Williams like nose tackle? Yeah, I think he could. So I thought Travis Jones at 76th overall, a guy who I saw some people say first round mock. I didn't see too much of that, but I think I saw a lot of people thought he was a second round pick. So you get that in the third round, you'll take that. So yeah, I think all these picks to varying degrees, there's some intrigue, and even the guy that kind of Joe Ortiz opened my eyes to a little bit. And I get it. It's late fourth round and played at Houston. Although keep in mind, Houston had a pretty good defense. I didn't realize Demarion Williams played all over their secondary. I thought he was much more a slot corner, and that's how he's going to profile because he's not very big, but he played safety. He played on the outside. He moved around a lot. And we've talked about this before, Dennis. And I've been on the fact that the Ravens have invested so much in their secondary and that analytics approach of coverage before pressure in terms of what you value. You want both, yes, but we also know you can't have everything with the salary cap. But he's just another example of how they're seeking out these guys that are very versatile. I mean, Kyle Hamilton, we'll see him play safety. We'll see him play, they'll play two wide and they'll do that. He'll be in the box. I think you'll see him play some nickel linebacker sometimes. I think he can be just play the nickel, dime linebacker, I should say. Could see him playing some big nickel, probably not an outside corner or anything crazy like that. But the point is, these offenses are so sophisticated. They have so many talented players in their passing game that, you can't just line up and, simplistic cover two. I think you're seeing a lot of two wide defense, but you've got to mask how you do it, right? You need to disguise and try to deceive. And Wink Martindale did that for a long time. And maybe they're not going to blitz quite as much with Mike McDonald, but I think you'll still see a lot of, switching up and just trying to deceive a quarterback. And there you go. I mean, if you can get that quarterback to hold the ball for a half second longer, that pass rush that you have some concerns about and doesn't have those all pros coming off the edge, gives them a chance to get to the quarterback. So it all works together. We know that. So yeah, I look at the edge and I'm nervous because Tyus Bowser's coming off of an Achilles, and I feel good about OA, but that doesn't mean I think OA is going to become an all-pro in his second year necessarily. And I love the Ajabo pick, but we know he's probably not going to play at least the beginning of the season. And you do have to wonder, he is a raw player who is going to miss out on the spring and summer. So I think 2022, let's be realistic. But all of that aside, and look, they could still bring in Justin Houston, who they just used the unrestricted tender on, which will increase the likelihood of him potentially coming back if he wants to come back. So in the meantime, boy, you've got a lot of talent in that secondary, and especially at the safety position. And you can really do a lot of interesting things, and it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out, because they you talk about some other position groups, but the secondary and specifically safety, maybe corner, they got some young guys backing up Peters and Humphrey, so that's a little more of a concern there. But all those safeties they have, it'll be fascinating to see how they kind of deploy their defense. And can also, not just talking about how that combats sophisticated offenses, but can hide those inside linebackers that aren't quite as adept in coverage. So you get to the point where you're in obvious passing situations, you only need to have one linebacker on the field, if that. There have been times where they could go quarter defense, and maybe Tony Jefferson lines up as the Mike linebacker, so to speak, when they're going to be passing the ball.
All great points, Luke. And I'll wrap it up by I read your column about the Ravens unofficially closing the book on longtime veterans. They've assigned the number of those veterans that we're talking about: Jimmy Smith, Brandon Williams, Pernell McPhee. Somebody asked me what it meant for Sam Cook that they drafted a punter. You don't need me to make that assessment for you,
Yeah.
but the writing is on the wall, very, very big in terms of what they're thinking.
Yeah, no question about it. And as you mentioned, those veterans, no surprises. I mean, I think the writing's been on the wall. I mean, Jimmy Smith has already said he wasn't going to play for anyone but the Ravens. He had all but said, yeah, I'm probably retiring at the end of the season. Pernell McPhee did not provide much of anything for them last year, had the knee. Brandon Williams, I think they signed Michael Pierce. They just drafted Travis Jones, who best profiles as a nose tackle, although I think you could see him move around the D line. So, it's evident he wasn't going to be back, but those numbers being reassigned. And look, the Ravens don't officially retire anyone's number, but we know, there's only a few numbers in this town that don't get assigned elsewhere: 52, 20, 75, 55. And there've been a couple other numbers here and there they've kind of held off on, but even, Joe Flacco's number will now be, it was Marquise Brown. Now it'll be Jalen Armour Davis. So, there are too many players, not enough numbers, right? So you have that, but you mentioned Sam Cook, and look, Jordan Stout. Clearly, the Ravens love him. I think there's some elements there they feel very comfortable about him as a holder.
Yep.
One thing that I know Joe Ortiz mentioned in his session with the media was they not going to be looking at him to kick field goals. Obviously, you still have a guy named Justin Tucker, but they do love his kickoffs. And keep in mind, Justin Tucker's now in his early 30s. If there's something you can do, and it might even just be that maybe they have him handle a couple kickoffs over the course of a game. If it's if it's a game where they're, scoring a lot of points, things of that nature. But if there's something they can take off of Justin Tucker's plate a little bit there and keep him strong as he continues to get older, that was another factor. But it comes down to this. They think he's a great punter, and you take a punter in the 4th round. That's why I'd like to see them with Sam Cook. Let him decide how he wants his exit strategy to go. The last thing I'd like to see is them to have some kind of sham of a competition.
Yeah,
I mean, short of Jordan Stout's leg flying off or something, the most absurd situation, or he gets hurt, which isn't outside the realm of possibility. I don't want to see this be, Sam's competing as a 4th round pick. This isn't a 6th or 7th. This isn't an undrafted guy coming in.
Right.
I mean, look at Justin Tucker and Billy Cundiff back in 2012. Tucker was undrafted. I mean, you could still say that was a legitimate competition. So,
it was.
To me, it's okay. Sam, do you want to go out now? Do you want to stick around for a little while? Do you want to kick here and stay here during camp? And you think that'll increase your likelihood of catching on elsewhere if you want to continue your career? What do you want to do?
Yeah,
what do you want to do? So that would be my only thing there. Let him decide what he wants to do here. I mean, if he wants to compete, but Sam's not a dummy. He's going to be 40 years old in August. He's seen a lot of, he was here when Brian Billick was still the head coach. I mean, that's how, he's the only one left that's been here longer than John Harbaugh in terms of players. So
it'll come down to, look, does he have an appetite to keep playing? And if he does, he can keep himself sharp. A team may need a punter at some point early or mid-season. If he wants to continue to extend his career, I mean, he's not the worst punter in the league. I'm sure he's better than a lot of punters on current rosters.
No question. And I think probably the middle ground scenario that would be great from a Ravens perspective would be if you can keep him around in some capacity for a short time at least. And maybe that just means if Sam is willing and you work something out. I don't know. Again, have that discussion. And I know they alerted him before the draft that there could possibly be taking a punter, but you'd love to have him work with Jordan Stout for a little while. Is there a scenario where you release him? The one thing I would say, I don't think anyone's signing him to be their week 1 punter unless there's an injury, someone, a torn hamstring, something along those lines, which happens. But, is there a scenario where you keep him around in some capacity? Maybe you release him and he's going to serve as a coaching intern for the spring. And then you announce that Sam wants to continue punting. You put out a statement and he pursues another opportunity, stays in shape, all that. I don't know, or they could release him later on today. I mean, that's just, we don't know by the time people are listening to our conversation here, but I think they'll do right by him, and again, give him some flexibility here. Jordan Stout's going to be their punter, barring something very strange, an injury, something along those lines. So, with that in mind, don't insult the guy that's been here for 16 years, and let him. He knows what's going on. He's seen it. Morgan Cox was they let him leave in free agency last year, and he saw Matt Stover let go years ago. So I mean, it's the nature of the business, but give him an opportunity to kind of set the terms on how this is going to go. I think that would be the good thing to do as an organization. Having some loyalty and some goodwill for a guy who was a heck of a punter and a good human being for the organization for a long time.
I'm confident that they're going to handle it correctly. They're a class organization. They try to accommodate players, be it Hollywood Brown or Orlando Brown
Right.
Jr. If they don't want to be here, if they can't work things out, they figure out a way to get them out of here. Luke, as always, I appreciate your time. Please tell our listeners where they can find you on WNST, Baltimore Positive, your blog, and all the other wonderful things you do.
Absolutely. I encourage everyone to follow us on Twitter at WNST. You can follow me personally at Baltimore Luke. I'll be live at the ballpark. Orioles finishing up this homestand before they go back out on the road. Check out my blog at BaltimorePositive.com, sponsored by Coons Baltimore Ford. My latest on the Ravens draft. I'll have Orioles coverage mixed in there as well, but lots of draft coverage. My latest 12 thoughts. As you mentioned, some thoughts on a few veteran players. The Ravens have very clearly, unofficially at least, moved on from, but have plenty of that as we get closer to, have rookie camp this weekend, so we'll have reaction to that. OTAs will be kicking off here in the next couple of weeks, so plenty going on at my blog at BaltimorePositive.com. You want to be on the WNST Baltimore Positive text service, sponsored by Coons Baltimore Ford. If you were getting the Ravens draft picks, even if you were out and about running errands and doing different things this past weekend, any Ravens signings, any Ravens releases, if the Ravens do cut Sam Cook, release Sam Cook, we'll get that out to you on the WNST Baltimore Positive text service, sponsored by Coons Baltimore Ford. And of course, anything throughout the week on AM 1570 with Nestor. Any Ravens interviews from coaches, players, executives, sound from Oriole Park at Camden Yards as the Orioles wrap up the homestand. Check out all of that at BaltimorePositive.com.
All right, my friend, always fun, always a pleasure. I appreciate you. Keep doing great things.
Thanks so much, Dennis. Appreciate you as well. We'll talk next week.
You got to take care. There he goes, Luke Jones here, 1570 AM WNST. We'll take a quick break and come back right after this.